Hello, New Yorkers. It's great to be here. I actually was born in New York. I know you can't tell from my accent, but I am a New Yorker just like you. Thank you very much for having us today. Can I introduce the other panelists? First, Drew Breunig. Drew, can you come up? Drew? Drew is a buddy and a fellow mad scientist. Drew is chief mad scientist at Omnicom, and we're going to be talking about social analytics, which is what I dream about every night. Dan Neely, where are you, Dan? Dan Neely. Come on, you could give a better clap than that. God damn. Woo! This dude just raised $20 million from Goldman Sachs. Well done.
Thanks.
Dan is the CEO of Network Insights. So, our job is to talk to you guys about social analytics. And we have a really wacky title, but what it really means is that there's lots and lots of fuzzy data out there. And to give you an idea about how fuzzy it is and how much there is, this is a little table of how many times people tweet every month by country. And you'll see that the Dutch and the Singaporeans actually tweet more than the Americans. What's really interesting about this is that every one of those numbers there represents both a publisher and a viewer. And it's not siloed. And can anyone tell me, and later on we will be giving flash cash to anyone in the audience who answers our questions, can anyone tell me, how, relative to SMS, how big is social posting? Like, does anyone know how many SMSs? Here we go. Oh, no, I know that guy knows the answer. What's the answer, Andrew? Can I introduce Andrew Grill, everyone? CEO, People Browser, UK. How many, Andrew?
There are 100,000 SMS a second around the world.
Right.
10,000 tweets.
So this, whoever says that social media is mature, wrong. This is like, we are 1 out of 10. Social media is a 10th in terms of posts relative to SMS. So let me now tell you a very quick story about what I tell my kids about what Daddy is doing. And that, once upon a time, my children, this all started when we were swinging through the trees and being chased by big, ugly, saber-toothed tigers. And we were swinging through the trees, and we evolved to the next level with language. And then we learnt to write it down. And then the internet came along, and we started collecting all this stuff that we were writing down. And our job now, this time in history, is to take what I call a collective memory and turn it into a collective intelligence. And it sort of started with the typewriter. Who in the audience has used a typewriter? That is so exciting. Because when I was telling my children the story, I said, who in the audience has used a typewriter? And my little boy, Sam, looked at me like, Daddy, crazy Daddy as usual. And I said, Sammy boy, he's 12, do you know what a typewriter is? And Sam said, Dad, a typewriter is what they used in the olden days to write emails. Right? So how quickly have we emerged from that? And so Brian Solis said this session was a little bit about Orwell. And those of us who read 1984 will remember that George Orwell said, and I remember being very depressed about this, that we would all be consumed by big data by now. Well, in fact, there is big data out there, and it's coming in at 10,000 posts a second. But in fact, what we're seeing is an Orwellian inversion. He got it completely wrong. This big data is being used by little people to actually overthrow institutions. And so the big data is being used by little brother to overthrow institutions in a way that we actually think is going to be very, very good for corporates and institutions, and I'll come to that in a moment. So we're all connected now, and we're very focused on influence and influence measurement. And this was a cover story that Time brought out only a few months ago. And the editor said, influence is impossible to measure. So let's have a go now at seeing how we could possibly work out how to measure influence. So first of all, there are billions and billions of conversations out there, and we need to look at it by community, and that's what we're going to be talking about as a panel. And then my theory, and I know because I've spoken to Drew about this, Drew has inspired some of this. My theory is that small networks of people, like if we all got together and started retweeting something, we would be more powerful than individual celebrities. So we think that we should be measuring both influence and generosity. And here I am. That's my family in the boat, and that's my wife jumping out. And that's a desert island, and that's my wife yelling at me that this is the only place that I have influence. We think that influence has to be very granular, and it has to be about community and location. And we also think, and this is the vision, that I should be able to come to a new conference like this and look at the audience and see floating over your heads little call-outs which say, you're a kite surfer, you're a CEO, or we have friends in common. So that later on, after this conference, we can much more rapidly make friends. So just to finish for one more minute, we're going to talk about all sorts of interesting ways of applying this fuzzy data. And we did a study recently. In fact, we built a system where we were challenged to use social to be better than or complement Nielsen Analytics for buying TV media. So for $20 flash cash, I will ask the audience, and Andrew, you can be my banker. Does anyone know how many times TV shows were mentioned by US consumers on social for this calendar year? And you can think about it for a minute, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we did. We took every single TV show. We worked out how people talked about it. We then took community demographics, and we worked out what communities were talking about the shows. And I think, oops, my next slide is the answer. I do that every time, and I don't have to give away $20. So there were 30 million mentions of TV shows. And we took all that data and we put it into buckets, and we worked out what the under-18s were saying, and it was really interesting. Anyway, my last slide, I had to include this. I was at the Occupy Wall Street demonstration yesterday. There's the police officer walking in front of me. And all my life I've been pissed off that I missed out on Woodstock. And I actually felt that we are at a time that is so important. And here it is the next day after the demonstration, where all these little brothers are being totally empowered by the things that we're doing, and inspired by this little girl who was sitting on her daddy's shoulders. They were all chanting, "We are the 99%." So with that, guys, we're going to chat a little bit about how we are the 99%, how we analyze all of this data, and we'd like this to be an open session too, where you guys ask questions. Thank you very much. Dan, do you want to kick off?
Sure. I'd love to know how many people use two devices while watching TV.
That's it? Yeah.
It's pretty impressive, right? I mean, I think the last set of data you showed up there around TV, whether it's going to replace Nielsen or not, that's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes in reality, but it is going to be an amendment to it. It's going to be something that, as you look at social data, how many people in here think of social as a channel? Something you go and do something in. No one thinks of it that way, where I go and do something in social? No one uses Facebook to go do things? It's like sporadic. It's interesting. So that's counterintuitive to when you go and typically talk to people that run brands. They think of it as a channel rather than think of it as a source of information to go and do something with. And so the challenge here, though, is when you look at the stats you had up there as far as big data, how do we segment this data? You know, the most interesting stat I heard last week, and I had this usually one a week, is 20,000 people create half the content on Twitter. So what do you do with that?
So I think that's rubbish.
It's maybe.
And I strongly disagree with what you said about Nielsen too. I mean,
Okay.
I'm going to live for a lot more than 2 years.
I think it's going to. So I agree with you. So I think it's going to happen. I just think when you look at agencies, which ultimately are a controlling mechanism in the system, right? And how do you think about it's going to be an amendment? It's not going to be a replace, because the currency that exists. Think about it. TV is really bought once a year at upfronts. It's programmed 4 times a year, and it's optimized 12 times a year. So there isn't a need.
No, but 5,000 people control the panel. 5,000 people control what billions of dollars are being spent.
So I don't.
Yeah, but less than 5,000 people are involved with purchasing television.
Yeah. So the control points that
small
exist.
group.
And that's going to change.
It eventually will change, and I think it will change when we have the current kind of group of millennials that are in college right now that watch TV online. My little sister just graduated from college, and she realized she could buy an Apple TV and save $80 a month. Once they become the most desirable marketed audience and they make up the bulk of that, the need's going to become very, very apparent because Nielsen's underweighting them anyway. So once that happens, the organizations will have to shift. And what I like is that we have this area out here, which is developing social media into a much more mature and manageable data source, so that when that moment happens, it's ready to kind of jump ship from Nielsen. Because right now there's no incentive for brands or agencies to jump ship to Nielsen because 70% of the dollars are there. And it's a very efficient machine to spend 70% of those dollars.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it, so today Networked Insights informs $5 billion of media. That's TV and digital. We are completely in the space, Jody, where you are, where we say we want to replace that ecosystem because old man Nielsen needs to go away, right? And so old man Nielsen, when I look at that, that's a challenge, but it's how do we segment this data, because it can't just be about TV. I don't want to walk in a door to a brand or an agency and say, I'm going to help you just with TV, because that's not how we consume. You look at all the people that just raise their hand saying, I'm using 2 devices. What often happens is, I just saw a TV commercial, it had Lance Armstrong in it, it had something to do with cycling, but now I go and do something to do with running and nutrition. How do I match those 2 things together, right?
Yeah, well, that's the point. And so what we find really interesting is that when we go along and advise people on how social should be used for TV media buying, they try and map it to the current Nielsen demographics.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my God, I can tell you who really likes your brand, who hates your competitors, and what colleges are having what conversations and what communities are having what conversations. No, we don't want to know that. We just want to know what the 18-year-olds, the 18 to 25-year-olds, and 25 to 35-year-olds are saying, so that we can map that to the budget that we have to show the board later on. That's what annoys me, and I think that mapping issue is the thing that we have to get our minds around.
Well, it costs more to prepare the organization to work with your solution than your solution costs. And I think that's where we're not quite there yet. And to come up on your point is the thing that we overlook is that Nielsen's really easy. It's very easy to buy television using Nielsen. And not only is it easy, no one's going to get fired for buying Nielsen.
So I don't disagree with any of those things. The reality is,
I love that you say that. 1981 and onwards, someone said to me, you know what? I'm not going to get fired for buying IBM.
Well, so one of the things that so having been doing this now for 5 years, one of the things, so the first 3 years we pushed against the ecosystem. The last 2 years we've really pushed against the ecosystem. And it is, if the person you're talking to gets to go home 5 minutes earlier as a result of using your solution, then you'll probably sell something, right? That's reality. That's this ecosystem. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. I mean, Drew is not, he's not lying in that it is easier to buy with Nielsen. I'm not.
And it is day one. I mean, we really are.
Yeah,
it is day one.
So it's going to take, what happens is, you're not going to probably sell it to the number 1 brand, but you'll sell it to the number 2 brand. Because the number 2 brand can't outspend the ecosystem and has to be much smarter than that of its competitor. They've got to go around them. They've got to figure out, it's the Oakland A's versus the New York Yankees, right? How do we outspend the New York Yankees without
San Jose A's?
Yeah. or it's not going to be an exclusive decision. We'll say we'll complement it. And one of the things that we've found in the study that we've done is that there's certain social data that's in fact ahead of the Nielsen data, so people can actually use that to media buy and arbitrage.
Yeah, and it's also not just, I think TV as a discussion in social, the discussion's there because let's be honest, the majority of the money is still there, right? The majority of the cash that's spent in media is still spent in those locations. As much as we hate that, that is true. But how do we start using it to do something very innovative? How do we start doing it to go around? So if I'm brand number 2, I'm the challenger brand, how do I go around the spend of the number 1 competitor? How do I use that as a judo move, if you will? And social is the first time that I think we've been able to do that, right? I mean, a quick example, if I might. Client that couldn't get into the NCAA. They were locked out of the NCAA. So they were trying to figure out what they could do. So we searched across data. We discovered a series of trends. Everyone thought it was going to be about brackets. It actually turned out to be about upsets. They created this really cool channel partnering with Google and YouTube around this concept. Right? And when they created it, we projected they'd have about 865 million impressions, a whole bunch of data, et cetera, et cetera. The more interesting thing is a car company had spent $42 million to get into the NCAA. Cars on courts, big TV commercials, the full wrapper that you would expect. Our client spent 2, got more awareness, more reach. That's what this is about. How do you use a judo move on your client? That's what you do. So it's now all of a sudden, it's not just about spending and buying TV. It's about, I understand TV, but I can use it in the context of content, of celebrity, of musicians, of how do I do a full wrapper on that?
So I think that's a perfect case study to talk about what the opportunity is for the next few years before, let's say the post-Nielsen world. The current Nielsen
Just the fact that you admit that it exists.
Oh, it will exist. But what's interesting is the opportunity we have now is we have the tools, but the world hasn't shifted.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest opportunity for social right now is not to kind of steal spend from TV, but work off that spend of TV. We refer to it internally as symphonic planning, where basically TV does one thing, we react another way. That's exactly that case study you just laid out, which is it turned out it was about upsets. Let's adjust our planning and our keywords to support that. And we're looking at how do you know if the ratings didn't deliver for an ad that was crucial in your plan? If they didn't deliver, or how are we taking advantage of the chatter that it generates online? So because we've seen connections between TV commercials and social chatter, and if we aren't taking advantage of that social chatter and engaging that, we're leaving money on the table because we already spent so much to get into TV. A little bit more percentage is not much.
Drew, may I share with the audience with a conversation that we had last night?
Of course.
So Drew and I were chatting last night about the panel, and we were talking about what is the really hard problem that we're trying to solve, and that is all of this data is just so fuzzy, it's so undefined. We don't get a flag that says that this person fits a particular demographic. What we do is we get some language, and we might get location, and we might get the community that the person is in. And then we have to try and work out how that maps to the sort of information that a brand wants. And Drew suggested last night that we use slang. We use colloquial, regional slang to put people into silos that will then help advertisers on messaging and to style their marcom. Because if you think about it, we're actually in a position where, for the first time, we can actually style our marcom to individual groups. We don't just have to do it mass market. And my view is that social media conferences won't be going on in 2 years. We'll be just having media conferences or marketing conferences, and it will be all about social. And there'll be some dude from TV sitting up here on a panel talking about why TV is still important.
It's always important. The colloquial, the accent, the idea of being able to judge what community you belong to by the way you speak and the words you use, it was kind of a product of a thought experiment based on some discussions that Jody and I had earlier. So my question to you guys, because I think you're an early adopter crowd, are your communities based more or less on geography, meaning your friends are defined by where you are? Is it more or less on geography than it was 5 or 10 years ago? So if it's based on more on geography or more reliant on how close you are to someone, raise your hand. And that right there, so like Nielsen is based, and all of our other things are.
You've got to ask a yes question to make.
Oh, the yes, but no one raised their hand.
No, but you can't just ask a no question because they may be doing their email.
Oh, okay.
You've got to ask a yes question.
Fair enough. So, how many people are friends with people, more people that live further away from you? It's bad phrasing, but. So it's pretty dominant. And I mean, what this says to me is our audiences as marketers are further ahead and have completely changed, while our systems for measurement haven't. All our systems for measurement that are kind of the tried and true, like up on the wall, like Nielsen, Experian, MRI, are all household based. And if you look at Nielsen or anyone else, they say, all right, how can we map to you? And they say, oh, just give us zip +4. And that defines who you are.
Zip +4.
Zip +4 tells you what side of the block you live on. So if you give me your zip +4, I can say you live on 2nd Avenue between A and B on the north side. But you guys just proved that that doesn't really matter anymore. So how do you basically create communities based on interest and who you actually talk to? So my background before marketing was cultural anthropology with a linguistic focus. So I always, to a carpenter, everything can be solved with a hammer. I want to know if people in the iOS development community talk differently than the Glee fans, and talk differently than, can we deduce, in the same way we can figure out a Texas accent, can we figure out, a sports accent? And I think I like that idea of a thought experiment of how can you look at just someone's production and filter what community they belong to.
And what metric you add to that.
The only way to do that is another thing has to flip. The methodologies that exist in social data today is all search-driven.
Yes.
I believe that I know what is important, therefore I will create a query and I will go find it, rather than discovery-driven, right? So the stake in the ground is, how do I discover what's important and what this audience looks like, so that I can actually say, cars, autos, vehicles, oh, this thing comes up which is whip.
Yes.
It's just slang for those things. And the reason that I'm discovering that is because the technology knows of everything that appears around it. The problem that exists today, and the reason you say that it's so hard for us, as technology providers to come in and work in this industry, is because it's all search-driven. It's all about how, when I walk in the door, 80% of your time working with companies is going to be setting it up. And that's super hard, versus how do I get it so it is all already structured, and I can use discovery to find those important things, rather than going in with a preconceived notion that it is these various things that I thought about going in.
I agree. That's one of the barriers of why every brand isn't building their audience with social, is that it's very complex and it changes.
Yeah.
But I actually think, I'm of the mind that stuff's going to change. I think Google is the terminal, and applications are the Mac OS. Like, it's the GUI. Like, you have to be a certain level of nerd to understand how to search something well in Google. I think us as a community kind of forget that sometime. And now, as we start to see these services being built into application devices, so it's not enter in keywords, crawl results, it's, Twitter's integrated to my iPhone, and I can now say to it, hey, show me a good place to eat. That's suddenly not a search. We're kind of, the technology's coming to meet us. And once we build up data and accrue that data on that new platform, I think it's going to create a lot of new opportunities.
But as brands and as agencies, we have to switch to a discovery mentality rather than a search mentality.
I think that's exactly right. This is not about Google search. This is about, what are my friends saying? Or what are strangers who I can find out who they are? What are they saying?
Yep.
And then what is the influence of that stranger? What's the outreach of that stranger? What are the metrics that I can see floating above all of your heads that tell me who you are and what you do? And it reminds me of Duncan Watts, the chief research scientist at Yahoo, recently published a book that I would urge you guys to read after you've read Jeff Hazlett's book and Brian Solis's book, of course. Duncan wrote a book called Everything is Obvious Once You Know the Answer. And it's really cool. What he says is that this dude called Gregor Mendel, do you all remember Gregor Mendel? Right, Gregor Mendel was the first guy to start quantifying genetic data with P's. And Duncan says that, once Gregor started quantifying things, everything else then followed, and we eventually ended up with, DNA and theories of DNA. And so for the first time in history, we're able to actually quantify through influence metrics, mentions metrics, viral metrics, social behavior. And so it can then be put into place where all this fuzzy data can be analyzed and replace some of the panels and the other things that we've been doing.
Well, and it just has to be fast. and it has to be easy.
And it has to be fast.
Right? So later today, I'm talking with MTV about Teen Wolf, right? So 3:40 today, we'll talk about this. That's my little plug. But the process we went through there is they had a set of hypotheses that they had with their agencies of how they were going to make Teen Wolf, as they launched this new show, appeal to the horror genre millennial. Well, how do you do that, right? They understand millennials, but now we have this horror genre as well. What works and what doesn't work, and we need to find it in real time. Because you know what? When you get to episode 2 in the TV world, it's make or break it time.
No, totally.
Right?
So we've got 4 minutes left, everyone, and we're very lucky to have these guys up here. Do we have any questions for them? Sure, go ahead.
So it varies. The question is, how do I have a bald head? No. The question is, what is the most engaging TV show and what is the least engaging TV show when it comes to social? It varies. So what we have is...
He's being so diplomatic. That's bullshit. I can tell you. Glee gets...
So it varies by target segment. So as I think about a horror genre millennial, it's radically different than if I think about 18 to 49-year-olds.
Just tell them what the worst is. Come on, tell them the worst.
No.
He doesn't want to tell you the worst.
It's on MTV, isn't it?
No, it's not on TV. But Glee is number one, and I'll whisper into anyone's ear afterwards what the worst is.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into too much trouble today.
Did anyone see there was a list that came out of the most bit-torrented movies and the most Netflix stream movies, and like the most Netflix stream movie was Bucket List, and BitTorrent was like Fast Five or something like that.
Any more questions, guys? I think we have 3 minutes left. There's one straight. The only ones we're seeing are the ones straight in front of us, so maybe we should pick one back there. Can you stand up, please?
Yeah, in switching from a search mentality to a discovery mentality, what are the key performance measures that brands should be observing there?
Oh, that's an interesting.
That's a great question. The question was, switching from search to discovery, what are the KPIs that,
So
that we should
the
be
first
thinking about?
is the number of people it doesn't require.
Say that again?
Organic.
The number of people it doesn't require. I mean, I look at, so as you look at paying your agencies on a performance-driven function, right, all of a sudden it is performance-driven because you're not paying for number of FTEs, you're paying for this thing you discovered, do you believe in it or not? When I talk about upsets, the thing that we did with the NCAA, I guaranteed that for my client, right? I didn't walk in the door and say, this is an interesting thing, let's do something with it. So it should be based on a performance-driven function with your agency, so it's how many people doesn't it take? Because no longer is it 80% of your time spent in setup, you're spending 80% of your time in the genius mode.
But if I were to understand your question again, if I'm a restaurant and I want to basically tailor my efforts to a discovery model, not a search model, what do I use to determine that metric? I mean, given all the data in the world, my metric would be, number of sales per presentation. So if 80 people ask, is there a restaurant in the area, we get presented 50% of the time and 5 of them go. That's my metric.
So I think the metric is mentions count, retweet count by community, and then aggregate influence and outreach. And outreach is really important. Outreach means what's my generosity relative to your brand. And we can quantify all of that now.
So, Jody, I disagree.
I love it when you disagree.
I think it goes back to business metrics. It goes back to what is driving this.
They are business metrics.
How much I sell, are my shareholders getting value out of it? That's business metrics. Fundamentally, the CFO should care.
Okay.
Yeah, but
so
these like the marketing metrics we've used and we create, and it's like, no, let's go back.
But that's because you're not understanding that metric. If you get one retweet, from Tim O'Reilly,
does it result in shareholder value?
Does it have the same value as a retweet from me?
Does
Absolutely not.
Does it result in shareholder value?
Yeah, but
does it result in revenue? Does it result in profit? Does it result in EBITDA?
One
does it result in more
retweet
sales?
Tim O'Reilly would give you huge shareholder value.
I'm not describing Dell's business model. I'm describing what goes on as far as, certainly, there's a social ecosystem that exists. I agree with you there, and it has value. But attach that value to the metrics that I care about in my business. That's what a CEO is asking for.
Absolutely.
And that's why the CMO is under pressure, because they have to attach to what the CEO cares about.
Yes, but it has to be attached in a way that weights those mentions counts and those retweets.
Yeah, I agreed. So
Yeah.
it ultimately has to go up to a set of metrics that are business metrics.
I think we have time for one more question, guys. In fact, we might be allowed to go an extra minute.
Oh, we have to go to the right-hand side. We went over the left-hand side. We've got to go to the right-hand side.
Over there on the far right.
Is anybody, my name's Robert Mathers, this is my presentation. Is there anyone, you mentioned this synchronic planning, which was really intriguing to me, it's something we're looking at. Is there anyone who's currently a leader doing that and how to put that tail on the actual
I'd like to say I'm a leader. No, I'm kidding. It's kind of nascent.
Do you want to repeat the question? I don't
All right, sorry. So he wants to know, is there anyone who's a leader in kind of symphonic planning, which is using the signal from one medium to inform the purchasing on other medium? We do it a lot, actually. It's funny because if you follow the kind of TV social stuff, it really gets overblown with how can we, or future TV, it's like how do you do streaming stuff? But what's really interesting is when you start converting the engagement with TV into a signal. So Jody would be a big thought leader in that space, and People Browser. I think, you've got some guys who are going out there with patents like Collective, who they have a smart product, but it remains to be seen how far it will go. Not Blue Kai, Bluefin. And then there's a question of how do you purchase based on that social data. So we have to end up cobbling together a bunch of different services. I call it TV 1.5. It's not 2.0. We aren't buying like we do digital, but we're buying digital in relation to television.
So Brian has just told me that we've gone way over time.
I'd be happy to introduce you to any of our clients, because that's what they all do. They all are in the space where they have to extend their spend and make it perform better than the next guy. So I'd be happy to introduce you to him.
I'd just like to thank you guys. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
Hello. You are about to experience a socially engaging event. Get your tweets, Facebook posts, YouTube clips, and email ready. Let me introduce the genius in the age of enlightenment with Hope Frank, CMO of Web Trends, Evan Green, CMO of the Recording Academy, aka the Grammys, Jeannie Mullen, CMO of Zinio and Viv Mag, and Paul Panaranda, fashion designer to the stars.
The Grammys is the only member-voted music award show based on artistic merit rather than fan popularity. But in the age of American Idol, that can be a double-edged sword, especially with the coveted 18 to 34 audience. Desperate to get higher ratings with this group, the Grammys needed to give them a voice without giving them a vote. Considering social media's impact on the music industry, we decided to tap into what they were already doing, sharing, tweeting, and paying tribute to their favorite artists online. We put the fans front and center. We'reAllFans.com was the epicenter of this idea. Here, people could get information on all things Grammys and interact with portraits of Grammy nominees created entirely from fans' YouTube, Flickr, and Twitter posts. Each portrait existed as an unfiltered, constantly updating, real-time social media aggregator. And by uploading a photo or using a webcam, fans could create and share their own unique portraits. To quantify pre-show buzz, we created an infographic tool. The Fan Buzz Visualizer continuously scanned the internet for every social media post about select Grammy-nominated artists. Also available as a downloadable widget, the visualizer helped mobilize fans to create even more buzz. We'reAllFans.com also functioned as the creation center. User-generated content uploaded directly to the site was then featured in print, video, and outdoor. During Grammy Week, founders of the world's most popular social media sites gathered for the Social Media Rockstar Summit, where they talked in depth about how their users are changing the music industry. By harnessing the enthusiasm of music fans across the social web, We're All Fans generated non-stop buzz for the Grammys. It was a top trending topic on Twitter, and the 3 We're All Fans videos got a combined 4.5 million views in less than 4 weeks. But the real proof of the campaign's success would be in the ratings. The Grammys aired on January 31st. 26.6 million viewers tuned in, a 35% increase from 2009. As for that coveted 18 to 34 audience, a 32% increase. The following day, countless articles hit the press crediting the Grammys and We're All Fans for bringing music into the 21st century.